Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Feel to Heal podcast, a mental health podcast to break the negative stigma surrounding all things mental health. For today's episode, I wanted to take a pause on finishing the book and speaking on my own personal experience with mental health and my own personal journey. In case you're listening, maybe you can relate to my experience, maybe you have similar experiences, and maybe if you listen to my story, you can see that you're not alone in what you've gone through. Just like everyone has physical health, we also have mental health. The thing with mental health is there's this perception that depression and anxiety is just made up. Some people think that it's a trend, and it's not that it's a trend. I was talking to my therapist about this a few weeks ago. I do think that a lot of it is more people are being more comfortable with talking about mental health. So it's not that all of a sudden there's so many more people out in the world with struggling with mental health. It's more and more people are being more open to talking about it. And I think that's why it's been so prominent, especially on social media. And I think that also the newer generations are being way more open to talking about it and not letting their mental health impede or interfere with their daily life. And I think that's such a wonderful thing because I think a lot of the older generations were forced to swallow what they were feeling because I think a lot of it was survival and just people wanting to survive. So if you try to bottle it all down or you try to act like you're not struggling with your mental health, eventually at one point or another, it is going to come out some way, somehow. I'm going to talk about my journey with mental health and kind of where it all started for me. So, I grew up as a really shy kid. Now, now that I look back, I think, was it that I was a shy kid or was it anxiety that was making me be a shy kid? Because I think a lot of the times with kids who are more introverted is it that they're introverted and that's just like their personality, or is it that they have such bad anxiety that it makes them shut down and super shy and in their own little bubble? There's a difference. Now that I'm older, I am trying to figure out, okay, was it that I was a shy kid or was it that I had anxiety so young that I just thought that was my personality, but it was really that I was just anxious. I think I was just more of an introverted kid just in general, but I think there was probably a lot of anxiety and anxious moments in my childhood that also added to it, so then it was a whole other layer of wanting to be in my own shell and not wanting to be noticed by others. So, I think it's a combination of both. Where I have my first memories of anxiety, if I go back in time and I think of, well, around 3rd grade, everything was fine. I was super energetic, playful, no issues that I can think of. But then all of a sudden, 4th grade hits, and I'm, like, I think around 9 or 10 years old, and all of a sudden, I started getting a lot of stomach issues. And it started getting, like, to the point where it was, like, every day, and so then I would spiral and panic when I would have my stomach issues. This could have been a reason, but looking back now, maybe it was such severe anxiety that it turned into physical symptoms, because that's the thing with anxiety is that it's not only struggling with the emotional parts of it, but it also manifests in physical symptoms. So I was around 10 years old, having a lot of stomach issues, going to the doctor, trying to figure out what was wrong. They really couldn't figure out anything. And then they were trying to do the endoscopy where they like put a camera down your throat to see deeper into your stomach. But obviously, me freaking out at that age, I'm like, no, like that sounded like the worst thing ever. I was able to get out of doing that. So I ended up not doing it. Then it started finally calming down, and 5th grade comes around, and I'm, like, doing a little better, and then 6th grade comes around, and still the introverted me, still my introverted self, but not really any more, like, physical symptoms during those years. My health issues aren't really anxiety, physical symptoms aren't really popping up, like, stomach issues kinda started fading, right? So, high school comes around and I notice that I'm doing these weird rituals to sort of calm my anxiety, but I didn't know why I was doing these rituals or these things that I felt like my mind and my brain was forcing me to do. Obviously, now that I've been to therapy and I did my own research about it and everything, I ended up finding out that it was OCD. But during that time, I didn't really know what that was. So, when I went to therapy back in 2020, I was having a lot of health anxiety, which again, I started having health anxiety since I was like 10, right? Having some sort of levels of anxiety is normal because again, anxiety is a normal emotion that people feel because anxiety is meant to keep you safe. And that way you're not like doing reckless things. But when anxiety is starting to affect your daily life and affect everything, then that's when it can be more than just anxious moments. So the first therapist that I had, we did the assessments and just talking to her and she said, "Yes, you have generalized anxiety disorders." And then I was telling her about those intrusive obsessive thoughts that I was having, which I started looking into that before I even went to therapy where I was like, "Okay, this stuff sounds like OCD, but again, I'm not going to self-diagnose myself." I told her I have these suspicions that it could be this. Can we like look into it? And then it was like, yes, I have OCD as well. And even though deep down I knew that that's what it was nice to hear like a professional tell me that yes, that is what it is. She said, you have OCD, you have generalized anxiety disorder. So then I was like, okay, so what are the next steps for me in trying to heal this or work on improving this? So I was working with her for a few months. She ended up quitting. Then I ended up getting a new therapist in April of 2021. Either 2021 or 2022. It was one of those 2 years. I can't remember which year it was. But it was a little while after that. I'm gonna go more into detail on the OCD and where I feel like the symptoms originally started when I was 10 and I was dealing with all those physical symptoms. I was getting a lot of obsessive thoughts during that time too, where it was I had to do specific physical movements before going to bed. Now, if you are someone who experienced OCD, you know what that means of you just have to do things until it feels right. So, another example of that is I would have to turn on and off the lights a certain amount of times until it felt right because if I didn't do it until it felt right, I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about it. It felt like I was a prisoner in my own body because my mind was controlling me. And if I didn't do what my mind wanted, then I wouldn't be able to let those thoughts go or just push past them and just like keep it moving. I have a specific memory of this one day when I was around 10 years old, when I was, like, checking all the doors to make sure all the doors were locked and checking them more than once. And again, what kind of kid, like, thinks about that? It's not normal, I don't think. It's, like, a thing kids really think about, and then it started getting really bad in high school, especially with door locking and checking the stove. Now, I think there's this misconception with OCD that it's all about being clean and organized, and it's a stereotype, right? I think the most common OCD obsession is checking. So whether that's checking that the door is locked, checking that the stove is turned off, just checking anything that you're scared something bad's gonna happen if you don't check the certain thing. So in high school, the one thing that I remember doing a lot of, if I was the only one home because everyone already left before me, if I was the last one to leave, I obviously had to be the one to lock the door. Now, this sent my anxiety through the roof because the thought of me having to be the one to lock the door, and if anything were to happen, I was the last one to leave the house. Oh my god, that would be my fault, right? So, if someone breaks in or I forget to lock the door, it's all my fault. I would lock the door and then I would start walking. The thing is that I would start walking like maybe 10 seconds away, and then I would have to walk back to the door and then check and turn the knob and check that it was locked. Because in my mind, even though I know I locked the door because I literally watched myself do it and I was seeing, like, oh, I'm getting my keys out, I'm locking the door, and I checked before I even started walking. My the OCD thoughts were so intense that my brain was telling me, "Nope, you didn't actually lock it. Go back and check." So I would have to go back and check because if I didn't, that's all I would think about the whole day is, um, I would just end up going if I didn't end up going back and checking the door, even though I knew I locked it, that's all my brain would be thinking about the entire day until I knew someone got home and that everything was fine. So I would leave for like 10 seconds starting to walk. I would be the thought in my brain would pop up, "Oh, I didn't lock the door." So I would walk back and then I would check the knob and it would be locked. And I'm like, "Okay, it's locked." And then I would leave and I would start walking and then again my brain would say, "Nope, go check again." So I would go back and check. And then it was still locked. And then even though I knew it was locked, I still was physically my brain was physically forcing me to go back and check because again, if I didn't go, my anxiety and the fear would be so intense that I wouldn't be able to function. So I did that for a couple like, I did that back and forth probably an average of 5 times, and then I would finally feel like it was right enough to leave. If you struggle with OCD, you check way more than one time because your brain is telling you that you didn't check enough or that somehow, some way it got unlocked. So in high school, I dealt a lot with that, with the door and this fear of the door somehow, some way being unlocked or not locked by me specifically. And the problem with that is that you waste so much time going back and forth. Like I could have been at school like so much earlier, but no, I had to more than triple check that the door was locked. So that was like one of the biggest obsessions that I had. Continuing with the door obsession, well, if I was like at home and I was going to bed and checked, because again, my brain's like, check the door before you go to sleep. I check the door and it's locked. But then I'm about to go to sleep, or I'm about to lay down, and then my brain's like, nope, you got to check again that the door is locked. So then I have to get out of bed, check that the door is locked. It is locked. And then I lay down, and then my brain's like, nope, check again. So not only was it if I was out of my house, I wanted to check the door, it was also if I was in the house and I was going to bed. Related to the stove checking, if I was leaving home, I would check that the stove was locked, and I would check more than once because I needed to make sure that the stove was turned off, even if I already checked more than once, or even if no one turned on the stove for the day. I'm like, somehow, some way, it's gonna end up being turned on magically. So those were, I think, the two main obsessions related to OCD that I had was the door checking and checking the stove. I think depression started hitting way later in my life, so probably specifically around like 19, 20 years old. Um, and I think for me, my depression stems more around because my anxiety is so bad. I get depressed that I don't feel like I can do normal things or live a normal life because my anxiety is so bad that I get so depressed that I feel so defeated. So for me, I feel like a lot of my depression is related to how my anxiety controls me. I'm depressed because I'm anxious. And I think also my depression probably also comes from like probably being deficient in some sort of vitamins too. I think it probably also has to do with like nutrition wise. I don't think I really dealt with depression or had to really impact my life until I was in college. Because then I think COVID added a whole other layer. I think that COVID really made everyone spiral, obviously. So that also added a whole other layer of issues for me. Now that I've been in therapy for about 5 years now, I've learned a lot of coping skills. I've learned a lot of things about how my brain works and how to help my anxiety and depression symptoms. But I do think that there is still a lot of trauma that I haven't really worked through, specifically like childhood trauma, because again, I don't want to feel the pain and think of those traumatic moments or situations. But you can try to ignore it and you can try to forget about those painful things that have happened to you. But unless you work on healing from it and working through it, it's going to still impact your life. I love hearing about other people's personal stories and experiences because I feel like if everyone's more comfortable and willing to talk about these kinds of things, there won't be that negative stigma. So I do take anxiety medication, and the anxiety medication that I'm taking not only helps, I think it, let me look it up actually, because it has, I think, multiple uses. So I'm taking Zoloft, in case you were wondering. Um, Maybe I'll do a whole other separate podcast actually. I think that actually would be a good idea to talk about the specific medication that I'm on and my whole journey of from when I started, when I decided to start it, and the side effects that I had and where I'm at today because I think medication is one of the more scarier things that I think people are afraid to try to see if it might help their mental health. I was a person who was so afraid, and I always told myself, "No, I'm never gonna get on medication. I'm never gonna do that. That's so scary. Like, I need to try every other type of method." But no, here I am now taking anxiety medication. So Zoloft, let me read the description of what it is. It says it can treat depression, OCD, PTSD, PMDD, social anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. So it's helps with anxiety and depression basically. And there's like different types of anxiety disorders that were listed here. Um so I've been on Zoloft since July of 2024. So I've been taking it for about 7 months now and I started taking it because I started having a lot of panic attacks back during June and July of 2024. I never really experienced panic attacks very often. If I did, it was only like once in a blue moon and they weren't very intense, but I think so back like 7 months ago, I started getting panic attacks like every day, back to back. They lasted so long and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't leave my room. I couldn't go out because again, panic attack after panic attack. Like at that point, I couldn't function. As a human, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go anywhere because they were so bad and they were happening so frequently that at that point, that's when I decided to take medication because I told myself, I'm like, I was desperate at that point. I was desperate to try anything. And I just felt like medication was necessary because, again, I've never really dealt with panic attacks in general. So I told myself, if I'm getting to the point where I'm having panic attacks every day and I can't leave my room, then maybe medication is the next step. So that's when I decided to start taking medications. And I'm so grateful because I feel like the medication was a big part in the process of helping stop the panic attacks and stopping them from happening every single day. And it wasn't even just them happening every single day. It was also it happened multiple times a day. So I never got a break because they would even happen all night. I stopped sleeping because the panic attack started happening all night long. And so then I would want to sleep in the day, but then I was still having panic attacks. So then I was like running on no sleep. And it was a really scary time. And I really hope that I never go through that again because I don't know if I would be able to get through that again because it was so scary. And I don't know what caused the panic attacks to start. If you're somebody who you've tried everything or you're at that point where you don't know what to do anymore and you just feel so defeated and medication's something that you've kind of been iffy about, I would say look into it and maybe give it a try because there is a high possibility of it being able to really help you and not have to live in that constant extreme anxiety and panic attacks and dark racing thoughts. So I would highly recommend you look into it because it really saved me and I'm so grateful for having finally the guts to try it. I would love to know your thoughts on this episode and let me know if you can relate to something. I would love to hear what your thoughts are and your own personal story and journey with mental health. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I'll see you next time.